So in the realm of human law, it was not for any man, not even a king, to declare this or that principle in law because, in his opinion, it was right or just or expedient. The law was there a body of tradition, received from the fathers, to be practiced, not improved. The law was above all laws, and it would have been presumption for any individual to claim the right to change it. In the world of art, it was the same. The Middle Ages produced perhaps the grandest expression of the artistic spirit the world has known, the Gothic architecture, and yet we are in almost total ignorance of the individual genius that inspired and carried out those wonderful designs. Whichever way we turn in the Middle Period, we are impressed with the fact that individual thought and action had only a subordinate place. The individual was of value only insofar as he made himself the agent of someone of the great dominant ideals by which society was ruled. There was throughout this time a something positively impious in the idea that a man was worth something for himself because he was a thinking being, with a mind given to him to use, and therefore worthy of this respect. The most vivid expression of this feeling is seen in the immense hold of the ascetic principle. The typical man of the Middle Ages is he who can most completely deaden himself to all natural impulses. The more completely a man could repress his self and sink himself in the mass according to one or another of the accepted methods, the more nearly he approached to the medieval idea of perfection. We come to realize all this when we begin to contrast the medieval spirit with that which animates every great undertaking of the period we are studying. In every field of human effort, one perceives now a significant change. The individual human being begins to assert his right to weigh and measure the universe by the standards of his own intelligence. A bold spirit of inquiry and of assertion begins to take the place of a timid yielding to existing authority. Grand general ideas, such as the sole and sufficient authority of the Church in matters of thought, begin to lose their hold. Uniformity of life ceases to be the highest ideal of society, and diversity begins to be respected. A man is no longer crushed when he puts forward an idea, but may at least be heard and has a fighting chance of winning his way. The two splendid fictions of the Middle Ages, the universal empire and the universal church, have both ceased to command an absolute allegiance and are adjusting themselves to a changing order of things. The nations are escaping from the leveling theory of a universal Christian state under ecclesiastical control, and are declaring their right to exist, each for itself, and to work out, each in its own way, the problems of administration and of social progress that lie before them. An immense material advance, the effect chiefly of the growth of a great, vigorous, and determined middle class, is carrying the European populations forward to ever new demands upon life and ever fresh exertions to satisfy them. New lines of trade and manufacture are widening the intelligence and capacity of the productive classes. Science, which under both ancient and medieval conditions had existed chiefly as philosophy, now begins to venture upon the method of experiment. All men are no longer satisfied with saying, these things are so because according to certain premises they ought to be so. Some bold spirits are daring to say, these things are so because we see or feel them to be so. Human powers of observation and reflection, human energy, a confidence in human evidence, a desire to cultivate oneself as a human being, a worthy creation of God. All these are taking place of the medieval distrust of all that was human. Our period has often been well called from one of its most important phenomena, the age of humanism, the same impulse that was leading scholars away from the dull theological traditions of the schools into the larger freedom of the revived classical duty with its fresh human interests, was moving also through all classes of European society. Wherever we turn, we find the same impatience of traditional restraint, the same restless struggle to throw off the fetters of a past that had had its day. The 14th century is seething with rebellion, nations against the papacy, humanism against scholasticism, trading cities leagued against feudal rights that would check their progress. Great masses of laboring people rising here and there in blind fury against legalized oppression. Everywhere, to use another antithesis, the struggle of common sense against the kind of sense which claimed to be too high and too sacred for the common man. For the first time since the end of the ancient world, that peculiar kind of argument which we can describe in no other way than as the appeal to common sense was beginning vaguely and hesitatingly to make itself heard and to win a following. This, then, will be the natural thread of our narrative, the working out consciously in literature and unconsciously through social and political conflict of the idea that individuals or bodies of men voluntarily united in a common interest might, if they pleased, speak and act for themselves. The following pages are an attempt to illustrate this principle by means of the most striking phenomena of the transition period. That such a study forms the best introduction to the history of the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century is evident. So far as possible, however, the more purely theological aspects of the time have been omitted here, since they may be studied more intelligently in connection with the Protestant movement itself. No attempt has been made to give a continuous narrative of events either in the history of Europe as a whole or of the several European countries. England has been left out almost entirely because her national development, largely independent of continental movements, has been abundantly treated in special works. The history of Germany after 1356 has been touched upon, rather slightly and only with a view to bringing out certain important phases, such as the Hussite wars and the working of the principle of voluntary association in the Hanseatic League. The German dynastic conflicts of the period are as unimportant as they are unedifying. The topical method here employed implies inevitably a certain amount of repetition, but it is hoped that this will be useful in showing the interrelation of the several historical movements described. I desire to express my obligation to many friends who have helped me with their learning and their counsel. Especially my thanks are due to my colleague, Professor Charles Homer Haskins of Harvard University, and to the Reverend Father Paschal Robinson of the Catholic University of America, who have had the great kindness to read my proofs and whose suggestions have added much of accuracy and fairness to the treatment of a subject necessarily involving many differences of opinion and of judgment. E.E., Cambridge, Massachusetts.